Yeah, this was an unscheduled stream, so no master. You're the only one who gets Pine Points. 1,000 Pine Points to you. 1,000 points closer to having a free trip to the luxurious Tropicano Casino and Spa with yours truly. My boss might even show up as well to join us. It is Sin City. Why do I title this Apologists Shooting Themselves in the Foot by interviewing Jon Steingard? Because they really are. Here's some free advice. Take it or leave it. Stop interviewing this guy because he's nice, he's civil, he's honest, he's reasonable, and he's come from Christianity for many, many years, and yet he doesn't believe it. And so, of course, it's not going to affect, as what's his name, J. Warner Wallace, as he says, you have 4 levels of humans, the ones and the fours that can't be shaken. One meaning you're going to believe in God and Christianity no matter what is said. Jon Steingard's not going to impact those people, but those twos, those number twos, who can be influenced by reasonable, kind, nice, thoughtful people, they're going to listen to Frank Turek's YouTube live stream here and say, man, some of the things Jon Steingard says make sense. Maybe Christianity is false. By the way, here's a challenge for Christians, and welcome to any Christians that might be here. I can say publicly that Christianity may be true, and I have markers like 1 Kings 18. If I saw that in front of my eyes in the name of Jesus, that would increase my confidence that Christianity is true. I can say that Christianity, the core proposition that a man rose bodily from the dead 2,000 years ago, may have happened. Now, there's going to be some Christians watching this in the privacy of their own home. I dare you, this is not a satanic trick. This is not a satanic trick. My boss didn't tell me to say this. This is my own volition. But I dare you to say out loud right now, you're home by yourself, I know it, or you're at work and the door's closed. I know nobody can hear you. But I'm curious if you can say out loud verbally right now, Christianity may be false. Now, for some of you, that's easy. You've said it in the past and you'll say it in the future, but for some of you, that might be hard. But this is your first step to valuing truth. If you value this thing we call truth, you have to consider that you may not currently possess it. Oof. Some Christians are going to hate that because Jesus is the truth, right? And so when they say that they might not be holding the truth right now, I'm basically forcing their hand and making them say verbally out loud that Jesus may not be the truth. But if you value truth, that could be true, right? Can you say that verbally out loud when nobody's listening? It's just you. And maybe God, if there's one existing, or gods, plural. I remember when I was on Capturing Christianity's Facebook page years ago, I basically had that same dare. I think it was similar to that. And basically asking the moderators, and I think even Cameron himself, to type on their Facebook page, Christianity may be false. Can you type that? Can you say that? I think that's the last time I was on their page, and I was gone. And here's another thing that bothers me that some Christians can't say. Like, I can say to a Christian, stay a Christian. And then I'll add things like, if you really need it and you think you're going to go commit suicide if you don't have Christianity, or you're going to do horrible things to other people if you don't have Christianity, I can look you in the eyes and say, hey, you know what? Stay a Christian. How many Christians out in the audience can look at me, through the screen at least, in the eyes, and say, hey, Doug, stay an atheist? You can't, can you? Maybe some of you can, but the vast majority can't do it. Now, isn't that interesting that an atheist or an agnostic can say that to Christians, but the Christians, especially Frank Turek's brand of Christianity, cannot say that. They cannot say, stay an atheist. That says something to me. What exactly, I'll save for another live stream. But anyhow, I'm going to play a few parts. I haven't watched the whole thing, but I've watched enough to know that it's interesting. And I want to play some parts where I think Jon Steingard comes off as very reasonable, affable, likable. And it's going to cause problems for apologists like Frank Turek, Sean McDowell, and others. I think he went on Jonathan McClatchy's channel. My recommendation is if you want your followers to stay firm, you don't want guys like Jon Steingard or even myself talking to you. Because we come off as very reasonable and funny sometimes, although I don't think Jon Steingard is that funny. But anyhow, the first topic they talk about is the problem of evil.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know you've been since then on that issue, and that issue is emotional for everyone,
one thing to note, it's not my stream, it's their stream. It's a little choppy. Some places worse than others, but but I think it's still okay to listen to.
So what your viewpoint is, but I know you've been reading about this, and I agree. When we see this kind of thing emotionally, it devastates us. And quite frequently, whenever I get a question, as you know, on the issue of evil, I have to stop myself, because if somebody's at their microphone and says, if God, why evil? I'm ready with my philosophical answer.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But I want to stop and say, do you mind if I ask you why you're asking that question?
Mm.
And if they say, well, I'm just intellectually curious, then I give my philosopher answer.
Now, by the way, what is his philosophy type answer to the problem of evil? It's actually not that philosophical at all. It's actually very simple. It's a bit of a off the cuff, I think, in my opinion. It's basically, well, God has morally sufficient reasons to allow it. Boom, done. It's basically appealing to mystery, appealing to, hey, we don't know everything, so I'm sure God has great reasons, so there you go. But to that, all you have to say to the Christian is ask this question. Would there be any sin, any evil, any pain, any suffering if God, your God, didn't create? They have to. They're forced. They have no free will at this point. They have to say, no. If God didn't create, there would be no sin. And so the problem of evil is an internal critique. There is no problem of suffering or evil for atheists. It's basically poop happens. Poop hits the fan. Look at the world around us. We got animals eating animals. We got humans killing humans. That is life. There is no problem of evil for the atheist. But there is a problem for evil for the Christian. Because the Christian, even if they answer like Frank Turek, that God might have morally sufficient reasons to allow evil, they're basically saying God is, now this is where Christians are going to disagree with me, but that's okay. We can agree to disagree, and Christians hate that phrase. But if God has morally sufficient reasons, what you're saying is God is okay with some sin because he has morally sufficient reasons to allow it. And this bothers Christians. This bothered me when I was a Christian. Well, wait a minute. God hates sin, but we as Christians have to say that he's okay with some of it? Because why? Because he needs humans to worship him? Because he needs to create? He has no free will not to create? He knows what or predicts what's going to happen if he does create and sees that sin's on the corner, it's on the back burner. In fact, some Christians would say God needs sin in order to have his divine plan of Jesus' death and resurrection to unfold. God is okay with some sin in order to have humans? This is the real problem of evil, that God created anything at all. knowing or predicting what would happen if he did.
But if they say my baby just died last week,
I know.
that philosophical answer is not going anywhere, right? That would be annoying.
Yeah.
That person needs a pastor. They don't need a philosopher. But I think that at the end of the day, the first step back to wholeness is for us to understand that God does have a reason, even if we don't know what that reason is, and even if we never figure out what that reason is. Because it seems to me there can't be evil unless there's good, and there can't be good unless there's a standard beyond us, which would mean God's nature. So as my mentor, Dr. Norman Geisler, always used to say, evil doesn't disprove God. It may prove there's a devil out there, but it doesn't disprove God. And so one of the things that, in fact, a friend of mine says, one of the things...
Frank's right in a sense that the existence of evils, pain, suffering, sin doesn't disprove God. Well, maybe not sin. Sin by definition, you have to have a God. But the real issue is, what is the nature of this deity? One could say that, as what's his name? Stephen Law has said, that one could posit an evil God. Yeah, the explanation for all the sin, pain, and suffering we have in this world is because there's a deity who created in his image evil people, because God is evil. And then we have the problem of explaining all the good around us. Well, this evil God valued free will, and so he allowed humans to freely choose to do good once in a while because he doesn't want evil robots. He wants free will, evil people.
It convinces me God does exist. Because we wouldn't even know it was evil objectively unless there was a standard of good, but what we mean by good is God's nature. So how would you respond to that kind of argument?
What we know is good is God's nature. Yeah, and this is a problem. This is a huge problem for Christians, because anything that flows outside the nature of this God, flows from the nature of this God, is good by definition. So the whole idea of human suffering and what is good and evil can be divorced from each other. In fact, something can be morally good that entails extreme, utmost suffering for all of humanity. Like, if you believe in a global flood, there's a good example. People dying, treading water slowly, painful death. That's morally good. So basically, this whole definition of good and evil is based on the nature of this deity, and not what we actually see around us, like pain and suffering or pleasure.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and reading about it. And I mean, before I say anything, I have to say that, like, my views on all this stuff are it's all a moving target. I mean, right. You've dedicated a lot more of your life to this than I have, and I
see. And this is a great way to start the answer. It's like, hey, my thoughts on this topic is a moving target. I can have my mind changed on things. He's very calm, very civil. This is what's going to shoot apologists in the foot, because Christians who follow Frank Turek, love Frank Turek, are going to listen to Jon Steingard and say, yeah, it's so sad he's not a Christian anymore, but, he's just... I'm going to listen to this guy.
I feel like I've been on this crash course, literally crashing, like falling asleep while I'm reading this stuff sometimes.
Right.
Because I'm waking up early before my kids get up and trying to squeeze in a couple hours of reading. But it seems to me that, you talked about there being an objective morality. And I've looked at the issue of morality a lot, because on one hand, like, the moral argument for God is really compelling, because most people do feel this moral intuition, right? I mean, but then on another hand, I kind of, at the moment, I have this sense that morality is actually, like, completely subjective. And
John, if that were the case, then you wouldn't be able to say that what was happening to those kids in Uganda was really wrong.
Yeah, what's he talking about? Jon Steingard went to Uganda and saw a lot of pain and suffering and misery, and said, hey, there's probably no God, or where's God throughout all this? And Frank's saying, hey, you can't say this is wrong if there's no God. This is this speaks volumes to the type of Christian Frank Turek is. Frank Turek is needy. He needs to have a daddy figure. He needs to have this authority figure in his life so that when he sees another human being do something that he thinks is wrong, he can say, the boss says it's wrong. Not Frank Turek. The boss says it's wrong, so stop it. Stop what you're doing. I have the creator of the universe. I have the oomph. I have the gravitas to look you in the eyes and say, stop it. What you're doing is wrong. This makes Christians like Frank Turek feel good. It's like, I don't have to do the hard work of trying to figure out what's right and what's wrong because daddy says it's right and daddy says it's wrong. For a lot of people, they need this sense of security and certainty. Maybe I shouldn't call it certainty, but this unbreakable foundation. The ironic thing about this, though, is even Frank Turek would admit, in fact, if you're ever listening to Frank Turek and you're doing a Q&A, if you have a chance to go up to the microphone during Q&A, and the topic is objective morality, ask Frank Turek, is stoning the practicing homosexual always, always wrong throughout all time, throughout all history, for all humans? Frank Turek has to say no to that. It was wrong 3,000 years ago to be a practicing homosexual and to stone that. It was right to stone that practicing homosexual 3,000 years ago, but it's wrong, I hope he says that today, that it's wrong to stone a practicing homosexual today. Remember, these are commands from the God that he believes in from 3,000 years ago. So it is based on the circumstance, the context. One time his God says it's okay to stone practicing homosexuals. And I think, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think today Frank would say, no, my God would never say that today. But doesn't everything, what's good and what's evil, flow from the nature of this deity? If it's right to stone practicing homosexuals 3,000 years ago, why wouldn't it be right today? If we have an unchanging God where all morality flows from. Sure sounds like things change depending on the time in history, right, Frank?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I feel like I can. So here's how I would look at it. I would say that I have moral intuition because it's beneficial for me to have it. I mean, if you look at everything through the lens of, the evolutionary lens of pleasure and pain, there's really good reasons for me to desire pleasure and to avoid pain. And those are really functional processes, right?
By the way, what Jon Steingard's saying right here, Christians agree with. They just take the pain and pleasure topic and shift it from here on earth to the afterlife. Pleasure, heaven, pain, hell. However you want to define hell.
Right. And we also live in social groups. So, and we have for a long time, and there's a lot of evidence that along our evolutionary path, that the fact that we're able to sustain social groups the way that we are actually benefited us, over other hominid species. So we have these social groups, and we have these desires to seek pleasure, to avoid pain, and there's a benefit to being a part of a social group where people value the pleasure and avoidance of pain of the other people in the group. And you could see that developing over a long period of time and being codified in what's sort of known as a morality or an ethic.
Yeah. Listening to Jon Steingard, I see Reed Nice Wonder in the chat saying someone read *Sapiens* in the Righteous Mind. Yeah, what he's saying it comes right out of that book, and a lot of evolutionary theory of morality.
And I don't. It is completely subjective in that sense, but it's still practically very real. So, like I go to Uganda and I experience this horrible suffering, and I'm not sure there's anything morally objectively wrong about it, but to me, subjectively, it's horrifying. And I don't think that because something is subjective means that it's not real or it doesn't have any meaning. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but for guys like Frank, if you say morality is subjective, then I don't have the oomph to tell you you're wrong. Because you can just say to me then, oh, that's your opinion, Frank. And I don't want you to say that to me. I want some oomph behind what I have to say.
Well, it might mean something to you, but if the people that wanted to push those people out of the land did so because it benefited them, how would you adjudicate between them who wanted the land and the people that are now suffering because they were pushed out of their land? How would
What does this remind you of? Talking about people being pushed out of their land in Uganda. I seem to remember the story of the Israelites pushing the Canaanites and other tribes out of the land. It's all about real estate, right, Frank? See, when God says it's okay to push people out of the land, then it's okay. But if man does it without God's approval, then it's morally wrong. I think Frank would say this. Any action, I would say almost any specific action that you see one human doing to another human can be considered morally good or morally evil from Frank's worldview. If God sanctions it, it's morally good, like pushing people out of their land. If God doesn't sanction it, and let's say it's Hitler killing Jews, well, then that's wrong. The question is, how do we know what God sanctions and what God doesn't sanction?
you say that the developers were wrong and they were right unless there's an objective standard beyond both of them?
You're totally correct. That's absolutely the problem. So it seems to me that you only need objective morality whenever you're trying to hold your moral intuition over someone else, right?
Someone in the live stream chat's asking a great question. Sorry to pause the video. Vindsus86 asks, why do you think people like Frank bring Jon onto their channel by popular demand? Do they actually believe they will be the hero who brings him back into the fold? Yes. I don't think it's just for ratings. I think a lot of apologists are chomping at the bit to be the hero, the apologetic hero, to show that apologetics works. And look, we brought Jon Steingard back into the fold. I'll make you a bet, Frank Turek. I'll bet you $200 publicly, $200 to a charity of your choice, charity of my choice, that Jon Steingard that you and I will die, Frank, before Jon Steingard ever becomes a Christian, and probably he never will again. This is what I'm saying, Frank. If Jon Steingard returns to Christianity, I should say the Christianity that you define as Christianity. He might become a Pete Enns type Christian, but I don't think you believe that's true Christianity. In other words, if Jon Steingard ever returns to Christianity as you define it, Frank, I'll write you a check to your ministry for $200. And if he doesn't, we should put a time frame on this, because I want your money, Frank. 10 years, is that too much? What's reasonable? Let's do 5 years. So September 25th, 2025. If Jon Steingard is not a Christian, write me a check, Frank, for $200 if you agree with this bet. And if he does become a Christian before September 25th, 2025, I'll write you a check for $200 to a charity of your choice. Or actually, you can just take your kids to Applebee's with that money. Your kids are actually old, though.
Would you say that's fair? That's the purpose of that's the utility of objective morality.
It's the utility, but it seems to me, as Louise Anthony.
What I said earlier about Frank wanting the oomph, the gumption, the gravitas to say, you are wrong, not because of my opinion, because of what God says. This is what I think I heard Jon Steingard just say, but he said it in a nicer way than me.
Moral intuition over someone else, right? So it seems to me that
right here,
that you only need objective morality whenever you're trying to hold your moral intuition over someone else, right?
Watch Frank's response to this.
Would you say that's fair? That's the purpose of that's the utility of objective morality.
It's the utility, but it seems to me, as Louise Anthony, she was and by the way, for those who are watching, we're just having a conversation.
Yeah.
You notice how he kind of diverted? And by the way, for those who are watching, we're just having a nice civil conversation, because Jon Steingard, in the most precious, nice, civil way, just stuck it to Frank Turek. Because Frank Turek, how many times have you heard Frank Turek say stuff like that? Like, you can't really say it's wrong unless there's a God. And I want to say something's really, really wrong. It just makes me feel good to say something's really, really wrong. And I want to tell other people that they're really, really wrong. And Jon Steingard just saw right through that and said, hey, this is the advantage of objective morality. You can feel good to say people are really, really wrong.
Trying to have a debate.
No, we're cool. We're totally cool.
Yeah, what we're trying to do is just talk about these issues in a little bit deeper way. That's all.
Well, and also for the audience, like, please understand, I push back on Dr. Turek here because I've found a lot of usefulness in when I poke at an issue, sometimes something falls out that I hadn't heard before.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
So it's my hope.
Uber Scheiser makes a great comment. Jon Steingard is worth $3 million. That may have helped him to pull the plug on his Christianity. True. What if I'm wrong and I lose the bet to Frank Turek if he takes me up on the bet? What will bring Jon Steingard, and Christians here, I think a lot of Christians are going to agree with me here. What will bring Jon Steingard back to Christianity is not to investigate the historical evidence for the resurrection. It's if he loses his wife, his house, his car, his dog, he's on the street corner begging for food, he's desperate, he becomes an addict, you name it. That's what's going to bring Jon Steingard back to Christianity. Desperation. And a lot of Christians agree with this, whether they want to admit it or not.
That I learned something here.
Yeah, you read my books, and you're a work in progress. In fact, we're all a work in progress. None of us have it all figured out, quite obviously. We should all be reading, right? But I guess the point I was going to say was that Louise Anthony, who was an atheist debating William Lane Craig a number of years ago, they were talking about objective morality, and she actually admitted something which hurt her case and helped Craig's case, where and I'm paraphrasing, she basically said that any argument I try and give that atheism is true is built on weaker premises than the intuition I have that say torturing babies for fun is wrong. I mean, that the intuition that what you saw in Uganda was wrong.
Yeah, the thing is, from my perspective, what makes things morally right or morally wrong is the reason for it and the goals of it. Like the Christians often like to bring up torturing babies for fun is morally wrong. That's always true. That's an example of objective morality. But what they don't want to admit, a lot of them, is the reason why torturing a baby is wrong in that scenario is because of the tagline, for fun. Now, you can set up moral dilemmas where torturing a baby might be the morally good thing to do. Now, a lot of these moral dilemmas can be very outlandish and more like fantasy, but you can imagine, well, some Christians can't imagine, but most humans can imagine a scenario where only if by torturing a baby can you save the planet from total destruction. If you have like an evil scientist with multiple nuclear bombs, and he says, either you torture this baby or I blow up the rest of humanity. And you have good reason to think that will actually happen. One could posit that by not torturing that baby, you are morally evil because you're risking the lives of everybody else.
Is so strong that it would take some Herculean evidence to overturn it, to say that atheism was true is really her point.
Right. I see what you're getting at. I just feel like you can experience something really intensely and it could still be subjective. Like I don't think something's being. Okay,
so I'm going to fast forward now. They talk about the problem of evil and objective morality for, I think, 7 more minutes. What Frank tends to do when he's talking to what he views as atheists or agnostics is he goes pre-sup. He doesn't talk about the evidence for the resurrection. He kind of even avoids Christianity. He goes straight to, does God exist? And he talks about presuppositional tag type arguments.
Yeah. We could talk about morality all day, obviously, and we want to cover a couple other issues too.
Sure, yeah.
And then get to questions of people who are watching here.
Yeah.
Let's talk for a second, a little bit, if we could, John, about logic itself.
Sure, yeah.
Because it would seem to me, even if one were to deny objective morality, it's impossible to deny objective logic. Because in order to...
It's impossible to deny objective logic. I would agree with the three major laws of logic, but there's a lot of types of logic. Logic can be viewed as a noun or a verb. You can do logic.
In order to say I deny objective logic, you'd be using logic.
Right.
So the question is, from an atheistic perspective, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, John. Would you consider yourself an atheist, an agnostic? What are you now?
I don't know. I'm not good with labels. I don't
forget the label. Let me put it this way.
Sure.
Here's a proposition. God exists. Do you agree? Do you disagree, or you don't?
There's a comment in the live stream that I had to approve, but I'm going to approve it from Me Draw Freelancer. Jon Steingard is a tramp who needs money, so he prostitutes himself to the media. Poor, pathetic. You know what? I sympathize with that comment, because I've seen Jon Steingard on so many different apologetic channels, and I'm thinking to myself, enough, John, enough. But then I started watching this, and I think I know why he's doing it. Now, sure, he might be just doing it for publicity and because he likes to be behind the camera and say, hey, everybody, look at me. And I'm a former star who's now no longer a Christian. But I think he is showing how you can have civil conversations with someone of an opposite worldview and make it work and actually change people's minds. So I went into this video actually this is a true story. Yesterday I saw this and I said to myself, I had a bad impression of Jon Steingard last night. And then I just started thinking about it and started listening to him here. And it changed while listening to him. And I really don't think he's just doing this for publicity. I think his motivation might be similar to mine. I think there are many, many Christians who are struggling, who have this cognitive dissonance. And he is a person who's saying, you know what? It's okay to let it go. It's okay to doubt it. It's okay to not be a Christian. And I think Jon Steingard would be the type of guy like me to say to some people, hey, you're a Christian, stay a Christian if you think you need it, if you think it's true.
Don't know.
I don't know.
Okay, so you're agnostic. All right, we got that out of the way.
I'm not making an active claim that there's no God. Yeah.
Okay.
I will this is where maybe John and I are different. I will make an active claim that the God of Christianity, the God of the Bible, is false, that God does not exist. But whether any God exists, I would need to be omniscient. And even when I say I know the Christian God doesn't exist, even that, I give myself a little bit of wiggle room, because you have to be omniscient to say 100% certain that there is no God, full stop. It takes a God to know one, in other words.
All right. Okay, so if I were to ask you a question about logic, you could say, well, I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Right? Unless you have something
I have thoughts about it. So I sort of I have a similar thought with reason as I do with morality. I'm not sure. Like I watched your discussion with Alex O'Connor on Justin Briley's Unbelievable show, and that was
a good one.
For anyone who's watching, it's a really good conversation.
Alex is a very, very smart young man. He's good.
Yeah, and I thought that your exchange was actually really constructive and helpful for someone like me because I learned a lot. I watched it like 3 times, and so one of the things I thought that was interesting is you brought up, if your sense of reason is just a product of blind evolution, then how can you trust it? You asked that question. Mm-hmm. And I thought about that for a long time because...
Oh, this reminds me of my conversation with Cy 10.
I think it's a really valid question. It's a good one. And my sort of answer at the moment is, I'm not sure that you can. And that's
a great point. I'm not sure you can trust your senses, your reasoning skills. Which is a great answer. Sorry, it's a great answer because I think Christians resonate with that. Christians who say something like this, the evidence for God is overwhelming. And the evidence for Christianity is also overwhelming. Why aren't more people Christians? Why aren't the whole planet Christians? Like, sure, you got rebels who just deny the evidence, but why aren't there more reasonable, intelligent people Christians? Now, from their point of view, from within their worldview, they can say, well, maybe their reasoning processes, their senses are not operating properly. Maybe humans can deceive themselves and see what's clearly evidence for Jesus' resurrection is not evidence for Jesus' resurrection, but evidence of a story. I'm speaking on behalf of the Christian right now. So the Christian can empathize with what John's saying here. And you guys have seen these optical illusions where you can have two human beings seeing that two things are different colors when in fact they're the same color. Our brains, and I believe because of evolution, are wired in such a way to deceive us. In fact, there's so many gaps in our sensory inputs that our brain has to trick us into making sense of it. So I would say a lot of the times we should not trust our senses. And this is the best part about being human, is we figured that out. We figured it out that our reasoning cannot always be trusted. And that's why we made things like rulers. That's why we made things like machines. You can see two lines and say, oh, yeah, these lines are different lengths. And then you take a ruler to it. Oh, no, they're the same length. A little piece of iron is more accurate than our brains.
Look at it from the perspective similar to morality, where it's like, okay, everything that I know comes to me through my senses, and then it goes through an interpretive structure, because my brain isn't storing raw sense data, right? It's like,
right, yeah.
I see things, hear things, touch things, and I have to interpret that information somehow. Mm-hmm. And that interpretive structure is based on a combination of my genetics and my previous experience. Do you think is that fair to say?
Well, and the laws of logic, because you can't know anything without the laws of logic. So,
sure, but like,
as I understand epistemology, which is what we're talking about here, is that, as you said, John, we get data.
You see what Frank did there? Jon Steingard was brilliant there. He says something, and he says, Frank, does that resonate with you? And instead of Frank just, I'm going to be rude, I guess. Instead of Frank being honest and saying, yeah, I can understand that. That makes sense. He goes, well, but we're not really talking about that. We're talking about the laws of logic. I know I made Frank sound more harsh than he really is. But this is why apologists are shooting themselves in the foot, especially Frank, by letting guys like Jon Steingard come in. Because any fence-sitting type Christian's going to listen to this and say, Frank, just shut up. Like, John's a nice guy. He's making a point. He asked you if you resonate with it, if it made sense, if it was fair, and you're just like,
data from our senses, and then we use the laws of logic to interpret that data and draw conclusions about the real world external to us.
Sure, but even the laws of logic, our understanding of those laws are something that have to go through that interpretive structure as well, right? In order for us to learn them.
Well, no, we know them as soon as we know, say, anything exists.
You need to phone a friend, Frank?
When we become self-conscious and we know that A is not non-A, and you can't, the law of the excluded middle, you can't both be pregnant, not pregnant. You just intuitively know that.
But do you think that you know that without that knowledge passing through your interpretive structure?
Well, what you're talking about now is Kant's view of how we know things. And the problem with Kant's view is
See, why is Frank bringing up laws of logic in the first place? Because he thinks that the only way you can ground the thing we call like the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity and so forth, is to have a God. Now, for the Christians who think that that's legitimate or that that's the only way you can ground, a person like myself can say, I can ground the laws of logic as a property of the universe. What sense does the law of identity make if you have nothing to identify? The fact that the universe exists and has the properties that it has is the grounding itself for logic. You don't have to go further than that. But Christians like Frank hate my answer because my answer does away with God. You do not need God to have grounding or justification for the laws of logic. It is a brute fact. It is a property of the universe. It is what it is. By the way, the language I'm using is the same language that Frank, I think, would use to describe why God's nature is what it is. God's nature is a brute fact. It can't be anything other than what it is. And the laws of logic is a property, is an outflow of its nature. So you hear how the language is the same? It's just substitute universe for God and you have your grounding. But I think my grounding is more, what's the word? Self-evident? No. Properly basic than Frank's. Hey, thank you for the donation, Lavington. Have a great weekend. Keep up the good work. You too.
Turns out to be self-defeating because he would, if he's going to say, here's how you remember Kant, you can't know the real world. That's how he said, because he said, I've got this external sense data, the phenomena, and then when it the noumena, your mind categorizes it in such a way that you can't know the real world. The problem is that if Kant says he can't know the real world, we have to ask a question, and that is, how can he know that about the real world?
Right.
See, he's presupposing that he knows something that he says the rest of us can't know.
Right.
So I don't buy Kant's epistemology.
Well, actually, so in your book, you mentioned in your book, I've read both your books recently, and I remember this.
Oh, so smart. I've read both your books recently. Frank's coming, what's he going to bring up?
Point, because I remember being really interested in Kant's perspective on this. And actually, if you look at, I think it was in I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, if I'm remembering correctly. But there's actually a footnote in that part of your book that answers that question. And I clicked on the footnote, and the footnote says Kant would basically, and I'm paraphrasing from my memory here, Kant would basically respond by talking about there's practical, is it practical reason or practical knowledge?
Critique of Pure Reason was his book. I'd have to look up the footnote myself, since that was 16 years ago.
Yeah, sorry. But so it seemed like you're in the footnote, you were referencing an idea that I had also been pondering, that Kant, maybe, I don't know exactly how he formulated it, but the way that I would think of it is that, like, if all of our knowledge passes through that interpretive structure, in order for us to know anything, we have to interpret, stuff that we're taking in somehow. So in a sense, yes, we can't trust anything that we know, but we do have to actually live our lives. And so,
yeah, great point. It's like we have no choice. Like we have to take in the data. The data is going to be skewed based on our past experiences and so forth. This is why, as bad as the scientific method is, it's the best we got. And I really don't think the scientific method is that bad. It can be corrupted through, scientists can, have biases and corrupt things and provide false data and so forth. But the scientific method was a way, and I think we stumbled upon it through trial and error, to help us avoid these problems with our reasoning. Try that with religion. It's like, what's the corrective mechanism in religion? Like the thing that a lot of Christians say is horrible about the scientific method. Oh, scientists 20 years ago said this, and now they say that. A lot of Christians view that as a bad thing. But if scientists truly change their minds on a topic, on a claim, because of new evidence or a change in evidence, whatever, isn't that good? When's the last time the canon was changed? Like, it hasn't been changed for 1,600 years, maybe a little bit, but the core principles of Christianity or Judaism or Islam, it's like it's stuck in stone, right?
You have to sort of act as if it's trustworthy, even if technically you can't know for sure that it is.
Well, it depends on what you mean for sure. There's certain things you can know for sure that you have to exist.
I have a bad habit of saying for sure. Jonathan McClatchy always gets me on that one. So.
Yeah, I understand. But if people are going to deny, if they're going to say they can't know, I'm going to ask them, how do they know they can't know?
I don't.
Well,
it's not that a person says we can't know anything. It's our confidence levels should decrease or increase based on the evidence and the support to believe it. for the reliability of the tests and the experiments, with the predictions we make. And if the predictions come true, we can say we know that whatever model that prediction was based on is probably true, but it's provisionally true. See, but for Christians like Frank, it's like, no, I need to know what is true and what is false. I need to have this binary thing, this whole idea of truth being a distribution or an asymptote that you approach is just too uncomfortable. It feels like my feet are sinking and the sand is going in between my toes, and I don't like that feeling. I'd rather be on nice, warm concrete. It feels better.
Well, then you've defeated your position. Then that's the problem.
I'm not sure that I have. I feel like I feel like all of us are operating as if we can trust the knowledge that we have and the things that we take in through our senses, because we have no alternative. We don't practically have the option of just saying, well, I can't trust anything I think, so I'm just gonna, I don't know, sit here and eat Cheetos the rest of my life. Like,
right, but it turns out that we can trust what we think, because
we can.
Obviously, from a practical perspective, you want to bring practicality into it. Every time I eat food, I get healthier. If I eat poison, I don't. So I can draw some.
That's an interesting parallel. We can trust our senses, because I know that every time I eat something healthy, I get better, and poison, I get sick. Well, not so fast, Frank. Doesn't your own scriptures say that you can drink poison, and if you have the Holy Spirit in you, you can not get sick? I think what Frank's talking about is induction, and that we can know things from past experiences. But that induction kind of teeters on the verge of going away if miracles are in play.
Conclusions about the real world.
So you've got a pretty good.
What better explains that? And I'm looking for a quote here right now for just a second. What better explains that, theism or atheism? And one of the things that I just discovered this from C.S. Lewis very recently, John. I just want to get your reaction to it, because I know you're a big C.S. Lewis fan. React to this. It's taken me a minute to read.
Yeah, that's okay.
He says, "Suppose there were, how can I trust? Therefore, have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God."
Listen to that nonsense.
Be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never.
Yeah, define thought. This is the problem that I hear when people talk about consciousness and the soul and so forth. The definition of consciousness for guys like Frank, it entails a God. The definition of morality, it entails a God. The definition of a soul entails a God. And so if there is no God, you don't have thoughts. If there's no God, you don't have a soul. If there's no God, there's no morality. But it's only because that's the way they've defined these terms. And so if you disagree with them, well, you're probably using a different definition, but I don't think guys like Frank can see that. This is why it's just so stupid, in my opinion, when guys like William Lane Craig trot out the moral argument for God. It's like the only source of objective morality from William Lane Craig's point of view is God, the God of the Bible. So it only makes sense that if there is no God, there's no God morality. That's like a no-brainer, but it's not very helpful, is it? It almost becomes a tautology at that point.
Never use thought to disbelieve in God.
Yeah, I may not be fully understand what we know is true, but we also know that a lot of people are very wrong about what they know or what they think they know.
Or they were not. There's no other.
Yeah, it gets really choppy here for some reason. This is not me. So I'm going to fast forward it to Frank says something really interesting. He admits something that I wish Jon Steingard would have tried to question him on this a bit more. It's about here.
Work that's not random. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I think it's much easier to show that God exists than Christianity is true.
Oh, certainly.
Much easier. I wonder how much easier. Jon Steingard should have put it on a scale of 0 to 100. How much harder is it to prove that Christianity is true versus God's real?
Yeah.
Yeah, because see, Christianity relies on historical knowledge. And not everybody has historical knowledge. That's one reason why you have different religious beliefs around the world, at least from an evidence perspective. Not everybody has the same.
See, you hear what he's doing here? Frank Turek is admitting that historical knowledge is not all that it's cracked up to be. The historical method is not as good as what?
Historical knowledge, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of God, creation, I think there are creation's one of the arguments, obviously fine-tuning, moral argument. We've been talking, consciousness, objective moral laws, if they indeed are objective, logical laws, all these things we've been just touching on.
Yeah.
So I think it's much easier to show that God exists than Christianity is true.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. Yep.
Yeah, and so I guess the two steps that we try and take when we're trying to show somebody that we think Christianity is true is God exists, evidence for that, and then Jesus rose from the dead.
Yeah.
How much reading have you done on the second question, Jesus rising from the dead?
A bit. I definitely want to go deeper on it, but I'm familiar with most of the sort of arguments that I've heard with regards to the sort of look.
Yeah, in my opinion, the problem with even if you're successful in convincing someone that a God exists, you really have to then say, the mind of this God so well that this God would desire to raise a person from the dead named Jesus, desire to do it, wanted to do it, when we know from observation on the world around us that if this God exists, he has an extreme proclivity, extreme natural instinct not to raise people from the dead. But in this case, because a man said he was God and because a man reportedly did miracles, and because some authors wrote that he predicted his own death and resurrection, then of course God desired to do it, and he, by raising this man, it solidifies everything this man said. No, and for the reason what Frank just said, that it's easier to prove that it's easier to defend a God exists than Christianity is true, because the historical method it's not all that. Man, you got a really tough problem on your hands.
Looking at the Gospels contextually and understanding, like the fate of the apostles, for instance. I know that's a big thing for Sean McDowell.
Yeah, it is.
It's a big thing for most
He's
people.
Studied that a lot. The fact that they
in fact, I was thinking of making a video of challenging Christians to come up with arguments against what they believe. So, martyrdom, in 2 sentences or less, 1 to 2 sentences. Christians, tell me why martyrdom is not a good reason to believe in the historical narrative that we have in the New Testament. If you can't do that in 2 sentences, well, maybe it's tough to only do it in 2 sentences, but I think I could. If you can't do that or have no idea even where to start, Reed Nicewander will like this. You haven't even begun to believe or to understand what you believe and why you believe it. If you can't in 2 sentences say why martyrdom is not a good reason to believe. Now, you can disagree with what you're writing, but if you can't at least steelman the other side, yeah.
I haven't read his dissertation yet, but I actually got it. I got a hold of it, so I'm gonna take a deep dive on that one at some point. At the moment, the sort of place that I'm at is I'm open to the idea of there being God, and I'm also open to the idea of Christianity being true. It's just whenever I come back to contemplating that and wondering if I could get back to a place where I believe that,
this is important.
I'm consistently bumping up into the same problem, which is, where is he?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because I think one of the questions that actually apologists don't deal with very often, the hiddenness of God.
Yeah. And
as Frank says, the historical method, it's not all that. Not everybody has access to it or whatever. That's what he said, but I think he meant something else. The hiddenness of God is a problem that can be easily overcome. Easily overcome. If the Bible's somewhat true, if Christianity is true, then God could show himself in a way that would convince people, or at least increase their confidence. Now, they would still have free will to reject God. A lot of Christians, if you're the type of Christian who says, well, God doesn't show himself or demonstrate himself because he doesn't want to take away people's free will. The devil believes that God exists. The devil lived with God in heaven and yet had the free will to reject him. So don't say stuff like that. You only sound like, to quote Vodi Bakum, you sound like an idiot if you say stuff like that. So this is why when I talk to apologists, when I talk to Christians who ask me, well, Doug, what would change your mind to believe that Christianity is true? I don't give the Matt Dillahunty response, I don't know, but God would know. I say, no, here's water. Dip a napkin in it. Pray in the name of Jesus to light it on fire. Go. And Muslims, if you're here listening, pray in the name of Allah that this napkin will light on fire. Go. That would take care of the divine hiddenness. And again, God didn't have to show himself, his face or whatever. But that is a pretty good demonstration. Same with raising people from the dead today. Think of someone that you know that's recently died. Pray in the name of Jesus that that person be raised. Even if you're a Christian, I think you got to admit that's even going to raise your confidence that Christianity is true compared to the historical data. And of course, you got the amputees. And, God doesn't like amputees.
I came up in a very charismatic environment. And so there was a heavy emphasis on relationship with Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I have to admit, I don't think that I learned a lot of arguments for God, for the existence of God, or evidence of the existence of. I didn't really learn a lot of that growing up.
Mm-hmm. Most Christians don't. This is why they say we need more apologetics. Most Christians are Christians because they love Jesus. They were raised in it. They've had some experiences. They feel guilty about sin. They want hope for eternal life, and they fear hell. There you go. You don't need to know the fine-tuning argument.
It was a very emotional thing. It was a very experiential thing. And so I don't know if maybe that's part of the reason I feel this way.
Sal Allegra, thanks for being here in the live stream, says, Doug, you cannot test God, man. You cannot test God. All I'm asking is, I'm not asking to test God. I'm asking God, Yahweh, Allah, whatever you want to call him, I'm asking it to do what he did in 1 Kings 18. There's precedent for it. Elijah was apparently a great prophet. Does God only do these type of miracles for great prophets and not for lowly PineCreek people? Does God not love me as much as he loves Elijah? And the people who changed their minds that day, who were following Baal, changed their minds on the spot and became followers of the true God, Yahweh, that day because of what Elijah did with the water and the wood? If it's good enough for Elijah, who wasn't testing God, he was asking God, why can't I do it? Christians, apologists, hate this answer. Because deep down, when their heart is crying, they know it's not going to happen. It might happen, but they know it's not going to. It could happen, but they know it's not going to happen.
But, I've been asked, what would it take for you to believe again? And, I read, there's a couple of stories in the Bible that if God is real, there's a few of these stories that really bring me a lot of comfort. And, one of them is the story of Jacob wrestling the angel, or wrestling God, and mm-hmm. Coming away with a blessing and a limp. And I go hey, if God, if you're real, I'm wrestling with you right now. That's what this is. And so mm-hmm. I'll take the limp,
Mm-hmm. Oh, Christians will love hearing him say that. I want to go to the QA. There was a few questions that were interesting. One was on child molestation, but we already talked about that. There was one about seeing colors. I thought that was interesting.
If when I see the color yellow, my experience of seeing the color yellow, I can't ever know for sure if your experience of the color yellow is the same as mine. I can't
Sure
know.
you can.
It's not possible.
Yeah, no, it is possible, because that's called the universal. When we both look at yellow and we both go, that's yellow, we're both admitting we're seeing the same thing.
Correct. We're both admitting.
Yeah, Frank is, well, we just both look at yellow and we see yellow, so it's universal, it's yellow. Okay, Frank, here's what I want you to do. In the privacy of your own home, Frank, wake up your wife, because you'll probably watch this in the evening. So wake up your wife, Frank. Don't look at the screen yet. Close your eyes. Close your eyes. So, Frank, I want you to look at this picture that I have up, and then I want you to tell your wife to also look at it. But I want you, before you do, tell your wife to hold her finger out and cover up the middle part. And then I want you to tell, at the count of 3, I want you to say what color the bottom is. B, the letter B as in boy. And you know what's going to happen, Frank? Your wife, who's using her finger to cover up the middle, is going to say gray, and you're going to say off-white. Well, some would say gray is off-white, but you're going to see 2 different colors is the point. But yet it's the same color. The ontology of what you're looking at has not changed. So this nonsense is, well, you see yellow and I see yellow. Have you ever heard of color blindness as well?
When we take in the color yellow, it has a specific wavelength. That's
right.
That's something that's true. And we all agree that when we take in light at that wavelength, we call that yellow. But my experience of what that is like is subjective. So
well, it's in the subject, but that doesn't mean that yellow's subjective. Just because everything you know is in you, the subject, but that doesn't mean the things you're knowing are subjective.
Right. But my yellow, my experience of yellow is subjective.
Oh, yeah. See, this all ties in. You could call, instead of saying yellow, you can say morality. And my point is, for a guy like me, epistemology is more important than ontology. What's actually real is one thing, and how we can know it's real is a different thing. So let's say this God exists. Frank's God exists. Let's say that's true. How can I know it? And I've given a suggestion how I would know it. Let's say this God is indeed the source for objective morality. Okay, I could say this. Great. But how would I know what these objective laws are? How do I know practically on a day-to-day level what is moral and what is not, if it's true that there's objective morality coming from Frank's God? Tell me, Frank, how would I figure that out? And I dare you to say, read the Bible. I dare you to say that. Because there's a lot of the things in the Bible that God himself commanded that you wouldn't for 1 second say I should do or follow. Okay, there was one other question about arguments for Christianity. I forget what it was, but let's take a listen.
We got like 2 minutes to go, so
I'm sorry if we're getting bogged down here.
I got this one, and this is for you, Frank.
right.
And James Meeks, through a super chat, asked, to know your side of an argument, you have to argue in the opponent's shoes.
Yes.
What do you think is the strongest case for atheism from your perspective, Frank?
What do you predict his answers? For people who have not seen this live stream, what do you predict his answer is going to be? Register it in your brain. The question is, what is the strongest arguments for atheism?
brutally honest, are good arguments for atheism. I think what atheists do is they have complaints about the way God is running the universe. But I agree with what C.S. Lewis said before. If our minds aren't designed, there's no reason to believe anything we think, including the thought that atheism is true. I think maybe it's
Frank, stay a Christian.
better stated this way. What are arguments that give you pause to believe that Christianity is true? Not that atheism is true, okay?
I actually agree with Frank here, and I think there's a practical benefit to saying it this way. And I know atheists disagree with me on this, but I think it is better to say there are no good arguments for atheism than to say there are. So a guy like Jon Steingard, a guy like myself, can say, there's not one good argument for atheism. Well, then why are you an atheist? Well, let me tell you why I'm an atheist. Because I don't believe your God exists. I don't believe Allah exists. I don't believe Vishnu exists. So what do I do at this point? I find all the evidence insufficient, lacking. So if you don't want to call me an atheist and just call me agnostic, so be it. I couldn't care less what you call me. But the strongest arguments for atheism really are the lack of evidence for theism. But it's really, the focus should be on theism, not atheism, because atheism is nothing. It's just not believing something.
And I agree with John that the two arguments that he put forth are evil and divine hiddenness. I think those are probably better arguments against Christianity than any other arguments, but yet Christianity doesn't deny evil or deny hiddenness. It says those things are true.
Yeah. So listen to what Frank just said. The two best arguments against Christianity or against his God is the problem of evil and divine hiddenness. But then he says, but my worldview takes that into account. It says, hey, my God's hidden, and hey, there's going to be evil. Isn't that convenient? It reminds me of, hey, guys, come into my garage. I got a dragon, a fire-breathing dragon. Come in, come see it. And then your friends come in. Oh, I forgot to tell you, my dragon is invisible. But it still breathes fire. It can fly, all this stuff. Well, and then your friend says, well, okay, here's a marshmallow. Tell your dragon to roast it for me, even though I can't see it. Well, my dragon shall not be tested. Thou shalt not test thy dragon, saith the dragon. Well, isn't that convenient? You see how this works? Oh, I gotta start the music. Okay, so how would I sum this up? I think what Jon Steingard is doing is okay, but for apologists, it's terrible. He's too nice. He's too reasonable. He makes some great points from time to time, and fence-sitting Christians are going to be attracted to that, and who knows, might leave Christianity. Now, I understand the desire of apologists to want to be the hero, to reconvert Jon Steingard back to the fold. But at what cost, apologists? At what cost? You might gain one soul and lose 10 others. You're welcome, Jason K. Brian Stevens says, have John on. I don't know what we would really talk about if Jon Steingard came on my show. Because we agree on so many things. I'm not a fan of his, like musically. Welcome, France. Parlez-vous français? Je m'appelle Douglas. Hey, thank you, Matt Metro. Sorry, but the whole channel is full of debauchery and chicanery. Thanks for brightening my workday. Yeah, this channel is full of chicanery and debauchery. But I'm on a mission from God. My apologies to Jon Steingard. He was scheduled to come on the show, but we ran out of time. Have a great weekend, guys. Take care.